This video is going to look at clustering or cluster analysis of our data. Again, this is unstructured data mining because what we have on the second part of the homework is we have a list of cities with crime rate, poverty, and income. We think that they may have something to do with where we live and things like that, or where we may want to go live. So what cluster analysis is trying to do, similar to the principal component analysis, where it was trying to draw lines or vectors through the items, instead consider this: if we took and made a scatter plot of just two of the variables, because again, the brain works pretty well with two variables. You could kind of see from a cluster analysis, if I'm looking at, once again in this area, poverty and crime, that maybe there is something associated with these cities, again, because every one of these dots is a city, right? I could go in and look to make sure exactly which one of these cities it is. But maybe mathematically, if I went in and said, break this thing up into two clusters, maybe the very first cluster mathematically may be this group, okay? Maybe there's something about this group here that mathematically makes sense to hold them together. And then this other point here, this other group, where we just say there's something related to this group of cities and there's something related to this group of cities mathematically. All right, now you get the idea of clusters. I could also, when I start off, I could say, okay, well, no, let's do three clusters. Well, mathematically, it may group this group, just those three components, because they look like they're doing something together, and then maybe these components. So what we're trying to say from a cluster analysis is, if things look similar, put them in the same group, okay? That's all cluster analysis is doing. I've done it simplistically here with just two data points. However, I can also do it with three different variables. I said data points. What I really meant was variables. Okay, so now I have three variables that I'm looking at: crime, poverty, income. I'm going to go ahead and highlight the data just so that Excel knows exactly what I'm looking at to try to solve this, to work on it. This problem is very similar to the one that's in example 11.1 of your book, back on page 480. And back on 480, it says that what we're going to do is we're going to do data mining. And in data mining, we're going to do a cluster. This time we're going to do hierarchical clustering of it. When hierarchical clustering shows up, make sure that the first row contains the headers, because it shows you the different variables. We're going to leave city over here as the in this variable. I'm going to move all of these over to my other selected variables in this this area. Make sure that I don't have any other stuff that I need to work on right there. Click on next. I'm going to normalize the input data, and again, normalization really is just a mathematical way for us to be able to hold things together. We're going to use the Euclidean distance, and then we're going to use the words method for that. This clustering methods, you can go in and you can read in the book why you would use other different methods, but for now, you're going to just trust me that it's words method. It's going to work the best for us. In this regard, we'll click next, and then for this one, I have asked you to use three clusters, okay? I've asked you to put three. We don't really have any good reason to say that three is the right answer, but let's go ahead and try it using three. Also put draw dendrogram on there, and then click finish. All right, this is your output's going to come up. And with your output, let's make sure that, pull down, let me go to HC clusters, sorry. So whenever I go to HC clusters, it says that record number 1 is associated with cluster 1. Record number 1 is Barnstable. cluster number 1. Okay. Back to HC clusters. Record number 2 is cluster number 2. Let me go back over here. Number 3 is also, record number 3 is also number 2. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through, now you've created your 3 clusters, you're going to go through and for each one of these items, you're going to tell me is it in cluster 1, 2, or 3. Once you have assigned the different cluster, just as we were showing before graphically, once you've assigned those clusters, then it's time for you to go in and say, you know, what's the average crime associated with each one of the clusters? What's the average poverty? What's the average income? And so you should, at that point, you're going to have cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3. This is going to be average crime, average poverty, average income. I don't care if you use a pivot table or whatever else you want to calculate these, but you're going to have all of your information the minute you assign all your clusters. And then once you have listed, you know, the information, you may very easily be able to see that cluster 1 may have the highest average crime or the lowest average income, or that cluster 2 has the highest average poverty. And so use this information where you have your averages to be able to give a brief description of the cluster based on the results. Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to get at here on this one is let's find a way to assign them to a cluster, and then let's define what those clusters are. Okay, hopefully this helps you, give you a bit of background on how you do cluster analysis, and once again, the value of being able to identify different clusters and what those clusters look like.